and so I'm not in full control of what's going on. Thank you. The recording is on. And for the motion, this House regrets the narrative that higher education is essential for success. In team proposition, we have first Hannah, Aniket, and Ziva. In team opposition, we have Mattia, Rhea, and Philip. And timekeeping will be done by yourselves. How will we signal? With a clap? How is that going to work?
I think we'll just all be disciplined and trust each other that we respect the protected time.
Yes, but how would we know when it starts?
Probably just about when you start speaking.
Okay, so that means everyone is keeping time for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Is everyone comfortable with that? Okay, great. I see all the nods. Okay, thank you. Over to the first speaker, team proposition. Hannah, could you open the case for this House regrets the narrative that higher education is essential for success when you are ready.
Yeah, just a second. Because of the narrative, higher education equals to success, we see mass enrollment into the colleges. Because of it, the only colleges worth enrolling into are Oxford, Cambridge, and maybe Maastricht if you want to have knowledge and a good job. Both side proposition. So what I'm going to do in my speech is first I'm going to go through two stances, and then I'm going to talk about our two arguments, and Arniket is going to talk about our third argument, which is going to be about prestigious colleges. Okay, so to the stances. So what is this narrative of higher education and success and captures in the society? We have three consequences of this narrative. First one is that if you have a diploma, people automatically perceive you as more intelligent / more successful. Why? Because you're on the prescribed good path of the society towards success. For example, employers are more likely to hire you because first of all, you bring more prestige into their institutions, and second of all, it's easier for them to legitimize why they're hiring you. Second of all, people think they need a diploma, which hinders their freedom of choice. We think that freedom of choice when deciding for your future is extremely important. Why? Because you will be the one living with the consequences. At this point, when we have this narrative in place, people are taught, or better said, coerced into believing universities are the only way of them actually succeeding in life, because also the employers want them to have a PhD, for example. Therefore, they have no real freedom of choice. And thirdly, we see that because of this idea of prestige and success, more people enroll into universities, and we have this trend of mass enrollment happening. Okay, second of all, what's our stance on universities? Here we have 2 points. First of all, we think that universities are cool and useful if you really want to study and enjoy it. When the universities are for the function and purpose of you being a knowledgeable person and being the purpose of an educational institution. Second of all, this sadly is not the purpose of the universities right now. What we see the purpose of universities being right now is, first of all, it serves more as a prestige rather than knowledge institution. For example, in high society, it is just one of the necessary accessories for you to have as a person if you want to be seen as a serious candidate to be in this high society. But second of all, employers are also, as I said before, more likely to hire you if you have PhD because you have this prestige point already covered up. But second of all, what's happening with the universities is that they're becoming more of a social institution rather than an educational one, because people go there after high school if they do not know what to do, and they just go there because they get the benefits of being a student. Okay, now that we covered the senses, what we tell you is that on the side of proposition, we prefer a world where people can enroll on their own free will and by their own interest into a university and are not shamed for not having a degree. Okay, so what are our arguments? First one is disproving the relation between education and happiness. Okay. Because of this narrative, higher education is essential for success. The basic formula, which could now almost be called an ideology, is basically if you're smart, hardworking, and you go to college, therefore, after that, you're successful and you have money and you get money and you get a job and you're basically on your high horse. But we tell you that is not the case in 2 points. First one, that success can be everything. Success is basically our way to find a comfortable life and be happy, which people are trying to do do right now with this narrative to do through the monetary values. But happiness is not necessarily defined for every human being as having, for example, six PhDs and having an amazing home, etc. What we tell you is it could also be simply having a normal low-paying job and a family, and you're also happy with it. Its happiness is important because it brings mental stability to you in your life. But what happens with this narrative? It forces you to not see those options as a potential way of success, and you throw away your potential happiness because you're expected to go to college by the society. You as an individual know the most what will make you happy, but you're stopped and coerced by the society for you to go into a university. Note, if your happiness is to go to college, we understand that and we endorse that, but that is not the case in all cases on the side of opposition. Second of all, what we tell you is even if success in the society is measured by money, we tell you 2 points. A, you don't necessarily get the money from having a PhD or just a degree because the competition is so fierce on the market right now. What happens is that many people enroll into colleges, and therefore many people also have PhDs or degrees. Therefore, there is a fierce competition on the market. Therefore, if you have a PhD, that does not mean that you will automatically get a job, even though this formula or this narrative is telling you that you will get a job, but that is not the reality. B, we tell you that we don't think that college should be necessary for success, because this narrative pushes down people who did not go to college, for example, for social or economical reasons or something like that, because they did not just have the means, and as a result, we push down potential capable people from actually succeeding in life, and furthermore, even we disincentivize them from succeeding because they do not have this degree in life. What we tell you that the takeaway of this argument is that we redefine the success, that is not all about the money and not all about the universities that we visit. Okay, our second argument is about lowering quality of education. Look, the quality of universities is being classified. We have two types of universities. First one, the average ones, and second ones, the prestige ones. For example, Ivy League in America. Aniket is going to talk about that more in his third argument. Well, I'm going to discuss the average universities. Look, first, what we have to realize is that with these average universities, what happens is we have more people enrolling into them because of this trend of because of this narrative of that if you go there, you will be successful in life. Because colleges now have more people applying to them, they will also enroll more people into the colleges. Why? Because then they will get more funding. No, thank you. You're over the time. Because they will get no funding. They will get funding through these people enrolling into that. So what we tell you is that because they will want more people enrolling into them, they will lower the standards of the participation or of the enrollment. Therefore, what will happen is 2 points. The shift of the courses will happen from getting knowledge to getting a diploma, which will lead to two consequences. First one is that the pace of the lectures is going to be very lowered, because then it's going to have to be measured not only for those high performing students, but it's also going to have to be paced for the students who are enrolling into colleges who are not as high performing. But second of all, even the classes are not going to be as personalized. What's the takeaway of this argument is that the quality of universities is lowered because of this narrative. And even if some people having college as a successful path towards it, this path is actually lowered because of this narrative. Thank you.
Thank you to the leader of proposition. Just give me a few seconds to take down some notes. Okay. Thank you to the opening speaker. I'd like to call upon the leader of the opposition to give us their speech. Here. I'll tap my laptop.
On opposition side, we believe that more people enrolling in college is a good thing, and that furthermore, the narrative that we are defending also makes it easier for people who are disencouraged from enrolling to enroll and pursue their dreams. Before my 2 points of constructive material, namely the benefits to the individual and the benefits to the society that this narrative brings, a couple points of response. First, on their framing of success. We tell you that they cannot defend authenticity on their side. In both sides of the house, there's going to be certain narratives and social norms that shape the wishes and the definitions of success of the individual. We are not sure why the default and other norms are any better than the one we are discussing today. But going furthermore, we tell you that you can study pretty much anything. So most of life goals of peoples can fit into higher education. Even something as seemingly mundane as being a farmer is actually and can be, and perhaps should be a highly technical and specialized study you perform at university. Furthermore, we tell you, we are going to prove that you get financial security by attending college. And we tell you that for any dream that you want to chase, be it having a family or something totally bizarre, financial security is a must and a necessity, a basic necessity for majority of people. Therefore, we tell you their framing of success does not harm the narrative that we are defending here today. The second point of negation is about the criticism they made of universities today, saying that they are of lesser quality. Now, first, I want to observe that proposition is defending status quo. And in status quo, we can factually observe that scientific progress and scientific excellence takes place not only in Oxbridge or in Ivy League, but all around the world, even though the mechanism that they're describing already takes place. Furthermore, we tell you, even if education is so much poorer on our side of the house, we tell you that it's still better than having no higher education. Because when you finish high school, you only have general knowledge with very little chance of specialization without guidance of teachers and professors later on. But finally, I want to observe a strange tension in their case, where on the one hand, they talk about how it is bad that poor people are hammered because they cannot attend university because of accessibility issues. But on the other hand, where they tell you that implicitly fewer students should attend to ensure greater quality, they are defending a world of past where working class students were actually locked out of pursuing a university degree. But more on that in the third argument, where Rea is going to talk about accessibility. Now to our points. First, how the individual benefits. We already told you that life choices are shaped by different narratives, and therefore we tell you the comparative in this argument is why we prefer this particular narrative over any other in the scope of the individual. 2 points. First, generally. Generally, we tell you the individual learns a lot when going to higher education. And there's 2 clusters of impacts that we observe. On the first cluster, talks about how they possess more knowledge and more specialized knowledge, while also learning how to think critically and analytically, because they're no longer only learning from a textbook, but actually learn from scientific papers and also perform scientific experiments and conduct research. We tell you this enables students to be more successful in whatever path of life they actually choose, because not only do they gain more knowledge, they also gain the ability to track scientific progress in the future and actually keep learning through life with the tools they have acquired. For the majority of people who then do what they study, this means higher education helps them a great deal. But second cluster of impacts, their horizons get broadened, because during college, they have the biggest access to the plethora of hobbies, activities, and people with different ideas, while on the other hand having the least responsibility, which means that they can access new ideas, things that they perhaps never knew existed before, which is why even college dropouts rarely go to doing what they had done before studying, but rather pursue something third, like something new that they discovered during college. We find, to finalize this, we just tell you 66%, like if you are a college graduate in the USA, you earn 66% more than high school graduates. You get $1 million more in your lifetime. Even in USA, where college is inaccessible, still this is a very good investment. Second point is about the marginalized communities, where we tell you 2 things, right? First of all, the marginalized communities can have strong narratives that exist in status quo that drive them to the position of subjugation. For instance, women who are always told to stay at home to take care of their family. Or B, there can be discrimination that causes barrier to success for ethnic or racial minorities. We tell you we improve that when we have the narrative of a higher education being the key to success, because A, we balance some of the narratives that keep minorities from attending college, for instance, keep women at home, etc., etc. But furthermore, the presence of these narratives in the workforce, because the whole society presumably values higher education, means that instead of arbitrary, problematic, either sexist, racist, or any other criteria that can be employed to, for instance, give out promotions or etc., the highest value is higher education and academic excellence, which means it's easier for someone from a marginalized community to access what they deserve in a discriminatory system, because now there is a more objective criteria in place that they can access. Second point I want to talk about is about the societal benefits, where first of all, I talk about how science and innovation happens more, because you have clusters of specialists who converge ideas, talk about ideas, and are converging in one area, and also then keep in contact for the rest of their lives. But also furthermore, that you get progression of political thought, because usually, and history has proven that time and time again, when you have young people who have the time and capability to think, and who are taught critical and analytical thinking, and have access to things such as their own media outlets, or etc., etc., what you get is you get a mass of individuals who fight for societal progression, which happened several times in history. For instance, in the late 60s, where identity politics and second wave of feminism and many movements spawned off the student movements of that time and era, while furthermore also preventing the rise of anti-science, anti-vaxxers, anti-climate change, people like that. Therefore, we tell you, both on the count of the individual and on the count of the society, we think this narrative is a good one and we support it. Thank you.
Thank you to the first speaker of Team Opposition. Thank you. I'd like to call upon the first speaker of the, second speaker of Team Proposition to address the House. Here.
Mr. Speaker, what is our burden for proposition in this debate? It is to show you that a narrative of higher education being the only way for success as something problematic. That doesn't mean we need to prove you that any alternative is better. That doesn't mean we need to prove you a counterfactual in a world without this narrative would be somehow better. All we have to prove to you is that this narrative is A, not the only way to success, and B, is problematic for the education system as a whole. That's what we've been doing straight from first prompt. 3 things in this speech. Firstly, analysis on success. Secondly, quality of education. And thirdly, under marginalized communities, before moving on to third argument about how it perpetuates elitism exclusively on all. Firstly, what did Hannah tell you about success that Mattia didn't engage with? It's about the coercive narrative that forces you to go into universities, even if you're not passionate about a certain subject, even if you're not passionate about medicine, even if you're not passionate about economics, you're still forced to go into that stream, into that university, specifically because there is a narrative that forces you to do so. No, thank you. Therefore, we think that happiness is at the expense of some sort of narrative that thinks that you'll get a better job in the future, which we proved to you it doesn't. In many cases, there are people who get good jobs and are able to have a lot of money without a university degree. So not only does it fail at actually perpetuating this narrative, it also fails at giving people the happiness they want, because the opportunity cost is doing something that you like instead of studying economics or medicine. But even if we take them at their best and assume that money is somehow, no thank you, the only way to have some sort of quantify success, we have a couple of responses. Firstly, Hannah talks to you about how at the point at which like the competition is so high at universities that standardization, which is what universities are supposed to be, doesn't work anymore, because a bachelor's degree isn't going to get you anywhere because everyone has one in the first place. Therefore, you can't get success purely through having a bachelor's degree and higher education in the first place. But secondly, you lose out on a lot of people who are smart dropouts who didn't want to go into higher education because of social or other economic reasons. And therefore, you lose out on people who actually have some sort of entrepreneurial potential, etc. These people are also part of this debate who are unable to get into the best jobs because you have a narrative of employers who simply look for people with a bachelor's degree from Oxford. No, thank you. Secondly, let's talk about the quality of education, because their main attack on this is to say at least people get into schools. Yes, but firstly, we think that at the point at which the people who are getting into schools are not actually motivated to go there, we don't see how this is a benefit. On prop, we think it's more likely that the people, no thank you, who are actually going into colleges are the ones who are actually passionate about that, are the ones who are actually going to be doctors after they study medicine. And we think that's good. And we think that these people who are going to get into college is good. But for the people who are not, you just get worse education as a whole. And this affects the entire community, who also the ones who are passionate and also the ones who are not. How? Hannah gives you numerous mechanisms. Firstly, through lectures being less personalized, through the speed of lectures being diminished for people of a lower standard. Because of the standardization, it means that more people are applied who are unable to keep up with the level of the college or the level of the course. What do they say to this? They say at least you have more knowledge in university, and give a lot of examples of critical thinking. Firstly, we say this is already less on off for people who are already less interested. But secondly, I'd ask, why is this exclusive to universities? I'd say if I'm very passionate about studying about economics, I would do so regardless if I'm going to university or not. They need to show you exclusivity of why only through university you're able to do this in the first place. Then let's talk about the sexism and the marginalized communities. Firstly, we say that people who are marginalized are far more likely to get a good job when they're passionate and when they actually have a high quality of education. But secondly, we say that assuming their narrative of sexism and of women being housewives as success, we think that this doesn't change anything on their side of the house. If a woman has hired a degree or bachelor's degree, but the narrative also says that women should be housewives, we don't think that anything will change if they have a degree or not. They will be perpetuated into a system of success that the society wants them to be. But I'm going to show you in my third argument how not only harms the education system as a whole, it also harms the people who are interested, it also harms the marginalized community, but it does perpetuate elitism. Firstly, 2 points I'm going to prove to you here before I go on. Yeah.
The purpose of changing the narrative between women being made to be housewives and women being made to be successful in academia is to diminish the power of the first narrative by giving it a counter narrative.
Okay, so firstly, we think that a counter narrative doesn't necessarily need to be education and higher education. And if you weigh off everything, we'd say that we're still winning on practical. But secondly, at the point at which, as I'm going to explain you in my third argument, these people are not going to be the ones who are getting into the most prestigious universities and the ones who are going to be able to get a job with a bachelor's degree. You're not helping those people very much either. 2 points I'm going to prove to you here. Firstly, that there's a flawed standardization. And secondly, there's an opportunity cost for good colleges that goes away to the rich and the elite. Firstly, what is the point of university generally? It's to standardize a certain amount of knowledge that employers are able to look at, and employers are able to say, yes, we want this person because it has that much knowledge. But at this point, it only actually means something if you come from very prestigious universities. Hannah talks to you about how the average university lowers their standards to increase students, but the very prestigious ones increase their standards because they want to maintain some sort of prestige in society. Why is it structurally, why structurally disenfranchised people less likely to get into these universities? 3 basic reasons. Firstly, because they're able to have private schools which have better teachers normally than public schools. Secondly, because they're able to have extra tuition lessons. They're able to study harder with teachers that other people are simply unable to afford because of high rates. And thirdly, as we've seen in the Singer scandal in 2019, some people even bribe their way into Ivy League and high-end colleges. What does this mean? It means that it's inevitably based on social class. The most prestigious colleges are inevitably based on social class. It's why Caltech, out of a 285 departments in computer science, has literally 2 Black students. That's what you call perpetuation of elitism. That's the status quo and the narrative that opposition has to defend. But secondly, we say that there's an opportunity cost for enrollment in good colleges, because in a world without mass enrollment, the people who are actually interested in like spending 4 years or 6 years of their life in college are the ones who are legitimately interested. They're thrown out for higher class people because the colleges are happy because you have more money and more prestige in the circle, but also because people who are in these colleges are able to boast that they are in Oxford and that they are in Cambridge. This benefit is despite the fact that the majority of people who are actually striving for academic success are structurally unable. Very proud to propose.
Thank you to the second speaker of the government team. Thank you. Second speaker of team opposition, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. Okay. The fact that this narrative exists means that more people go to universities. And even if a person didn't enjoy going to university, we think that by going there, they have gained valuable tools which improve their life afterwards. This is what we're proving to you, that just by going to university, your life is better, regardless if you, first of all, wanted to go or not. In this speech, I'll do several things. First of all, I'll reconstruct our case, what hasn't been rebutted. Second of all, our rebuttal. Lastly, my constructive argument about how we're increasing accessibility and quality of higher education. But first of all, Richard, let me just reconstruct something that has been untouched by the other side, right? Because we brought to the point about political agitation. We said that in universities, there is a unique benefit of people with activist groups likely to unite and likely to cooperate. We get activism such as Students for Climate, we get independent media such as student radios, we get political resistant groups as we've seen historically. That is likely to happen because we have like-minded people who are very educated and ready to critically assess our society, but also they have the tools to activate, such as mentors, professors, libraries, and spaces to meet. This was a unique benefit that we put to you, no rebuttal from their side. Before we move on to the other rebuttal, let me just respond to their third argument about prestigious education. We think that we agree that there's a problem with prestigious education, such as Ivy League, but we think that this is not exclusive to our side. We think on both sides, you would have universities to which it is more difficult to get into and which include racism and which are very problematic in their narrative. The difference is just on our side, we have 10 people out of 100 people who can get there. On their side, there is 1 person out of 10 people because less people go to universities. We don't see how this is exclusive for our side, but we agree with the general problem of this point. So let me go to the more general rebuttal, right? So first of all, I want to talk about happiness, a very important point, because we agree that to some extent happiness is subjective. But look, we think that fundamentally is in our capitalist society, a large amount of your happiness depends on your financial security. What we mean by that is only once you're financially secure and your life is somewhat stable, we think you're able to enjoy other freedoms that you get. So we think that for most aspects of happiness, you're better off going to universities because of 4 crucial reasons. First of all, you get this financial security, right? You're more likely to get a job, more likely to just feel secure. Second of all, once you have the financial means, you can comfortably get a family, get a partner, get a house, right? Those are all aspects of happiness, which are very important. Third of all, you have the mental tools to make better decisions further in life, right? Mattia talked about gaining scientific knowledge, how to approach problems analytically. This is the knowledge you get through universities. So concretely, this means that you're less likely to vote for, to fall for populist propaganda, or you're more likely to understand taxes or nutrition of food. Very random points, but this is all the knowledge that you gain in universities, something that just makes you make better decisions further in life. Fourth point, we think that once you have the financial stability while going to college, we think that you can also take up your own hobbies, things which actually make you happy. So we think it's not very likely to become a successful painter when you're 20, but it's very likely that you have the freedom to enjoy painting throughout your whole life once you're financially secure while going to college. Those are all reasons how happiness is achieved more likely once you go to university. Now let's go to the freedom of choice point, right? So this was very important because we brought this point about minorities, because we think that in the absence of the narrative that we're proposing, you have other competing narratives for success, such as the patriarchal narrative that women will be successful once they have their families, or religious narratives that you will be successful once you dedicate your life to God and to family. Those are all competing narratives. We think that this narrative is comparatively very important because, especially to marginalized communities, it gives them the opportunity and the platform to actually educate themselves and have the other definition of success. This means for women, for example, that they have a chance to be seen as successful, even though they don't have the traditional norm of having a family. So for marginalized communities and people, this is much better. Last point of rebuttal about lowering quality of education, right? So first of all, we prefer on a trade-off that more people are educated, even if education is less personalized and perhaps has a lesser quality. Because what the other side has to defend with this narrative is the status quo. And if we think that status quo is better than 50 years ago when less people went to universities, but those were the more privileged people, were people who could afford to go to universities, and were in the end people who were leading the society in general, right? We prefer the status quo where more people are educated. But further on, we think that quality of education is actually much better because of this narrative. And this brings me exactly to my third argument, which is about increasing accessibility and quality of higher education. So once we have the narrative that higher education is the key to success, we think that governments make decisions taking this narrative into account, right? We think that three crucial things happen. First thing, government invests more into higher education and also science. So we think that because of this, because of governments recognizing the importance of higher education, they're more likely to dedicate their budgets into higher education. And you should also note that a lot of science and innovation is taking place on campuses as part of universities. So once more money goes to higher education, more money also goes to research and innovation in general. We think that more money is also likely to go for infrastructure, equipment, and things like that. So in general, once the importance of these faculties is recognized, then more money is likely to go there. Second point of the argument, education is more likely to be cheaper or even more likely to be free, right? This is our also response to their third argument about prestigious universities. So I think that once governments recognize importance of higher education, they're more likely to prioritize accessibility to this kind of institutions. So we think that this means that they're more likely to give scholarships to more people to go to higher education, especially in countries where higher education is not free. They're more likely to offer more scholarships. This also includes prestigious universities. They're more likely to enable more people to go to those universities. They're more likely also to give subsidies to disadvantaged people, right? This is something that doesn't happen without this narrative. Last point of the argument, firms and organizations are more likely to invest into educated workforce because they recognize that more educated workforce is more likely to be successful, more productive, more efficient. They're more likely to offer certain donations or scholarships to people in order to attain higher education. These are scholarships such as the Erasmus scholarships and all of this kind of opportunities for people. Overall, what is the takeaway of this argument? What you should crucially remember? First of all, higher education becomes more accessible to different groups of people through scholarships and subsidies. Second of all, the quality of such education is better, including the infrastructure of those universities. This is something you exclusively get once this narrative exists. Because of that reason, I'm incredibly proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you to the second speaker. Thank you. From the second speaker, I would like to call upon the third speaker of team proposition. Here.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you drinking.
Thank you. That means my microphone is good. What OP has still failed to engage with, Mattia, please stop texting on Messenger because we can see it. What OP has still failed to engage with throughout their entire speeches is the fact that the entire narrative shifts the focus of what the work marketplace, the labor force is like. It creates this need for individuals to have a higher education, to get hired in certain jobs. It creates this need to have this paper that proves that you are capable to have this diploma. And thus it shifts the idea of wanting to have from an education to a diploma. This both shifts the idea you actually have to go to college, and thus lessens the amount of workplaces in which you don't need college, in which you don't need this college education to be hired at those places, but also shifts the focus of the education towards to a more diploma-based rather than an education-based. In my speech, I'll mostly go through the negation and the three main clashes, which will be intertwined with the negation in itself, because it is a quite good clash with the entire negation. Okay, let's start with the negation. In their argument about accessibility, it talks about the idea that at the point of which more people go to colleges, governments are more likely to prioritize colleges for their investments and scholarships, and other companies are more likely to invest in certain things like that. But what we're combating is not the idea that more people are the ones that are leading governments to invest in these people, in colleges, but rather the idea that more people are becoming successful because of these things. And this is not necessarily because more people are going, but because people are generally more passionate and more intelligent. This does not mean that we necessarily need more people to be capable and more people that want to go to colleges for governments to be investing in these things. Rather simply like better individuals. So at the point of which we have a better quality education, we still take this clash. But further, at the end of the day, this also goes for accessibility and other forms of which and scholarships, etc., etc. But on a comparative, which Hannah has told you and has still yet to be engaged by opposition, is the whole, because of the shift in narrative or from an education based to a diploma based, a lot of this quality work is reduced simply because more people are not paying attention in class due to the fact that they want to be more highly educated and create and innovate and things like that, but rather to simply get the diploma to get a higher paid job, and etc., etc. So this actually diminishes the few that actually would create a lot of better things in the future to a lower standard of education in the process, and thus creates less innovation and less everything that is going to make governments wish to invest in these things more. So this was the first clash. This was the negation integrated with it as well. Okay, let's talk about our second and third clash, which is the individual lives. And lastly, let's talk about society, which has three subpoints. Okay, no, thank you. When we talk about individual lives, we talk about the narrative which hinders the freedom of choice and the ability for people to decide what they can do with their lives in the future. Note that the entire idea here is that the expectation and the entire forcing you into the idea that you have to have a diploma to get a good job means that you cannot, in most theories, go outside of it in the process. This means that it actually forces you to get to a diploma to get a good job rather than to get a job in the first place. And you cannot choose to get a job because you are not going to be given the access towards such a labor market in the future. So essentially, this forces you to go to college in the first place. This forces you to have an extra step in the idea of stability. Why that is bad is particularly because it takes away the time, it takes away the ability for you to be exploring a lot of options, and it really focuses you to a specific field, which essentially lowers your ability to change your jobs, etc., etc. To counter that, I'm pretty sure that colleges aren't the best possible at the point at which most people go to college, simply because, firstly, most people don't get jobs in their specific degrees that are actually getting, and secondly, the higher education actually takes a lot of time and actually forces you to essentially throw away your 20s into these ideas. On a comparative, you can still get stability with a pretty good job if you don't have this narrative, if you still have the ability to get these jobs with younger families traveling, etc., and you can still get the development that they bring you. What they say on their side of the house is essentially that college gives you this new perspectives in science and in essentially the world and your ability to change your life in the future. We don't understand how this is exclusive to colleges, at the point at which your ability to travel, your ability to get different jobs is hindered based on colleges, simply because they take a large portion of your daily lives. So I'm pretty sure on a comparative, if you are able to travel, if you're able to explore other options, you're more flexible and more likely to discover yourself, no thank you, on a comparative, simply because college forces you into this rigid system in which you're really unlikely to change your courses. Okay, let's talk about the society, which is the last batch. 3 sub-points. First one, let's talk about science and the anti-science point, which has been brought in their second speech, in their first speech. Secondly, let's talk about the marginalized, and lastly, we'll talk about the movements that have been brought from colleges. When we talk about the narrative of anti-science, we don't see the rise of the rise of the rebutting the ideas of anti-science because of the fact that most people go to colleges, but mostly because essentially the media is rebutting this in the process. I don't understand how you have to go to college to not believe in anti-vaxxers, simply because I have never gone to college and individuals have never gone to college, and still the majority of the rebuttal does not happen in a biotechnical degree. It happens, in the media, in the intermediate, in the politics in general. So exceptionalist individuals that are actually experts in those fields are putting forth these points. So this doesn't actually come simply because you go to college. Secondly, let's talk about the marginalized communities, which is essentially, we have 3 points as to why the marginalized aren't better off in a world in which we have the narrative. Firstly, simply because the college system in itself is already biased for the rich white men, simply because you have the ability to go to college, to prioritize your time and to put it into a structural college system, and thus you are able to be better at it, even if you are, regardless or not if individuals get applied or not, they're still better on a comparative. Secondly, the counter narrative that they bring forth, that we have to have more counter narratives for individuals to be able to be liberated from the rigid systems. I don't understand how it is good to create a new rigid system that forces marginalized communities to throw away essentially their 20s and their entire lives into a workforce that is going to be forced by college to be a good counter narrative, when we have other counter narratives, which is a flexible, for example, work market, or to be an individual that is able to escape it in other ways. We can have different counter narratives, but the fact that this narrative is so strong disables those narratives as well. Thirdly, this entire system is essentially due to the fact that it is biased towards individuals that are already wealthier and thus not marginalized. It is worse on a comparative than, for example, the job market, simply because it is strictly based on some objective ideas of grades and other forms. On a comparative, when you have a job playing field, it is not so objective, so those counter narratives are more likely to be brought forth. Let's lastly talk about movements, which is going to be a very short rebuttal / clash, which is essentially that on the past, sure, it was really needed. I'm sorry, it's 7:38. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. In the past, colleges were needed because there was a lot of there was not the internet, but now we have the internet and we have other forms of means for ideas to be presented and individuals to be brought forth, and ideas to be brought forth, and we have experts that bring these ideas. We don't need colleges to do that in the first place. I'm sorry, I had 1 more minute than I actually would have to. Sorry.
All right, thank you to Jiva. All right, thank you. I'd like to ask the Last constructive speaker, the third speaker of team opposition to give his speech. Here.
Before I start, can I be reassured that the speeches are 7 minutes? Because I'm a bit confused now. Is it 7 or 8?
Thank you, Aniket. Raise your fingers again.
I can't
7.
see Aniket. Wait, let me just 7. All right, 7. Good. All right. 1 second. All right. Side government presents us with a weird narrative in which they only want to give access and the ability for people to study to those that are the most wealthiest so they can ensure a better quality of teaching, whereas leaving the ones who otherwise wouldn't choose college, the ones that are usually from a discriminated or like deprivileged backgrounds, to lower menial jobs because they cannot get the degree and the knowledge necessary to do something else. What I'm going to do in my speech is ask 3 main questions that have shaped this debate as a whole. Firstly, I'll ask if this narrative is wrong. Secondly, if this narrative is harmful. And lastly, I'll talk about what are actually the benefits of attending college, whether or not you agree with the previous 2 points. So firstly, about this narrative being wrong. Side proposition had 2 points here. Firstly, they said that the narrative is coercive, that it alters what makes us happy, that basically influence our freedom of choice, things like that. So we had a couple of responses here, which I felt like were pretty responded to so far, but I'll just add some more. So we believe that you cannot objectively decide what would necessarily make you happy. Whether or not we have this narrative or not, we have different narratives that are shaped by our environment, by our friends, by the media, by either social media or movies, all of those things. So I don't think that proposition necessarily showed to us what it is, so how individuals could access this inner desire that they have that wouldn't necessarily be influenced by this narrative or not. So, but secondly, we also told you how a lot of these narratives that aren't necessarily like the most conventional ones, or even if you believe that in order for you to succeed, it doesn't mean that you have to have a lot of money or that you have to have an academic degree. An academic degree and money, which is something you can get from these from enrolling into college, is usually one of the stepping stones that secures the path to other unconventional methods of happiness that they want to talk about. So we're not really sure what this what they're trying to prove with that. Secondly, about how this narrative is wrong. And here we have pretty much a one-liner that's repeated over the first 2 speeches, which is that you don't actually get anywhere with a bachelor's because nowadays everyone has a bachelor's and the competition is so horrible. So Mattia actually gave you some stats that you actually do get into places when you have a bachelor. I think it was 66% of people actually have like a higher income than usual, and you earn around $1 million more through your lifetime if you attended college versus if you haven't. No, thank you. Secondly, it's not just that like the competition is too big nowadays. So firstly, with more people enrolling in academia or enrolling in college, things like that, you actually get a higher job market because those people are like have expanded job market, expanded job opportunities because those people are likely to like start their own businesses and employ other people. Secondly, it also opens the path to academic work. So you being able to teach or do work at universities if the universities are bigger because they have more people enrolled. And lastly, even if you don't end up like doing anything applicable to your degree, whether in academia or like being employed by other graduates, you still develop skills that are applicable elsewhere, things like critical thinking, or you simply gain some connections, all of those things that have been mentioned and have been like explained to you by our first speaker, but sadly weren't really well responded to by opposition. So we do believe that this narrative doesn't necessarily coerce anyone, and it's also not wrong because that's just empirically not true. All right, secondly, is this narrative harmful to have in the society? So first thing they bring out here is that it lowers the standard of teaching. And the education quality simply plummets. This doesn't necessarily make much sense, because at universities, actually, with people enrolled, usually get more money because those people pay tuition fees. Secondly, they usually get more people that have been enrolled in their universities publishing things that gives them prestige, and that also a bigger alumni network that is likely to donate back to them. So for all of those things, that we think that they have a higher access to capital, and with that, they most likely will try to rise with their prestige, things like that. And there's really no incentive for them to lower their standards once they have their money. Secondly, about students work further, and now that the narrative that students will suddenly stop being passionate and work just to get a degree, otherwise they will work because you go to university because they're passionate. We don't necessarily see much harm in that, even though we don't accept the whole narrative. But we believe that even if some students aren't as incentivized and motivated as others, we still don't see why that is necessarily unproductive for the society or for the students themselves. Even if they don't like what they're doing, they're still getting skills. They're still getting connections, all of those things. But secondly, people usually actually develop these kind of passions at universities. So we do believe that once, even though you might not go to university because you necessarily love something, you might actually develop some kind of passion once you're there. All right, so now that we've cleared that last question, what are the benefits of this kind of narrative? The things that they mostly glossed over in this debate. Firstly, we believe that simply by more people attending, universities, there's benefits arising just from that, from knowledge, from critical thinking that is instilled in you. Second point about political masses, politically critical masses that are usually breeding grounds, especially in universities and colleges, since you have many people with different kind of opinions that kind of clash each other out, and make for politically critical discussions more likely when they are educated and on the same plane. And lastly, things like science and scientific discoveries, even if not everyone is very highly motivated and amazing, we still believe that they will contribute to science a bit more. Now, we believe that that's absolutely crucial in the case as we are right now, in which we are right now, where finding a cure or finding a vaccine for the virus is one of the most essential things that you can have. Secondly, we also talked about how this changes norms for women and the poor, whereas the old notion that women are not supposed to be in high-end jobs, that the poor are the marginalized group or ethnic minorities have some kind of statuses attributed to them, which are usually detrimental to their ability to get employed. We believe that by the fact that we so value education as a society, we combat those norms and make them more employable. And for all of those reasons, this is the end of my 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you to the last constructive speaker. Just a few minutes for notes. All right. We're ready for the reply speeches. How long are those? 4 minutes. Okay, good. Standard time. We'll give over the first reply speech to team opposition.
It is strange to me that for the majority of its time, proposition talks about freedom of choice, where in the first opposition speech, in the very first minute, I told you that today they're not and cannot defend authenticity and true freedom because there is a plethora of competing narratives in any given society, which means that even if a world without this particular narrative were to exist, there would be other narratives that would inform and coerce individuals. And I went further than just that, and I explained to you how for a lot of people, especially for marginalized communities, the example of women, for instance, the competing narratives are much worse and put them into a much more subjugated position, something to which there was very little response from proposition in this debate. And the point here is, all of their impacts about freedom of choice you must disregard. When they spoke about marginalized communities in their third speech, then they said, well, you're just adding another criteria for them. And I think this is once again ignoring our material, because I told you in my speech that that politically universities are a place for progressivism, which means if there is any place in society where a marginalized community can have their chance, that's probably the university. And if the education is the high standard for success and for promotions and all that, we tell you probably it's the most fair and equitable if that be the university. Therefore, all the things about freedom of choice and marginalized individuals, they lay on side of opposition in this debate. Then they talk about quality of education in this debate. And I think here we have to realize something. We are defending status quo here, right? And we know in status quo intuitively and as a fact that universities are not just a paper that you're getting, that in most areas you are learning a lot and you are learning things that you could not have learned otherwise, because even if there's many students at an average university, you're still going to be able to learn about quantum physics or philosophy or whatever you study much better, drastically better than if you would try to do that on your own. Obviously, because you have the external motivation of exams, because you have the guide, the professor, all that. And now, of course, if there's only one student for 1,000 professors, the education is going to be better. But the harm that they are describing, the harm, I ask you, where is the harm of having, like, how big is that harm of diminishing quality? We are not sure, and the real world does not tell us what harm, why that harm is so bad. But what does opposition prove, amongst other things that I already mentioned in this debate? First of all, we tell you it is helpful for individuals to access higher education because they uniquely gain knowledge, critical thinking that they need to be successful in anything that they might do. We spoke about marginalized communities earlier. We spoke about political activism, which takes place uniquely in universities because not only do you have individuals who want to engage with politics, as proposition mentioned, but you have them all congregating at the one place in the time of their life where they are unburdened with families or work and have all the time to discuss and produce ideas. But also Rhea told you, and there was very little negation to that, Rhea told you that, you know, we want to have more people studying, and the only way to have more people studying and to have accessibility for more people studying is to have a societal perception that there is a necessity for universities, because only this is how you generate political pressure or incentive for companies to donate, things like that. Very little response from their side. In the end of this debate, we tell you on opposition, there is no freedom of choice or authenticity, but we prefer the situation of individuals on our side. We tell you there's better accessibility on our side of the house, and we tell you that science and society benefits from larger congregations of individuals at universities. Because of that, we oppose this motion with all our heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the opposition reply speech. Then we have the last speech of the round, the reply for team government. Here.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, heard.
Mr. Speaker, for Opt to say that you should disregard all our arguments about freedom of choice and all our arguments about happiness and how the only way to do that is to have a free choice in society, they disregard a lot of the negation that we give you to their attacks on our characterization. What do we tell you as our counterfactual generally happens? It's that people are passionate, and many still are passionate in society and go to colleges. Their main, as in reply they tell you, is that there are other competing narratives that exist. But me and Jiva told you that at the point in which this narrative has a monopoly over others, at the point in which you're able to dedicate 4 years of your time and you're coerced to dedicate 4 years of your time to this narrative, you're unable to have any competing narratives in the first place. But secondly, this wasn't our burden in the first place. Our burden wasn't to tell you that other narratives are better. Our burden was to show you why this narrative is somewhat problematic. I think we've done this in 2 specific questions. Firstly, on success and what that means, and secondly, on the quality of education. But before that, let's get off a quick characterization trade-off that happens, because we think on both sides of the house, people are going to go to college. There are people who are interested in different things, and they're still going to be incentivized to go to college. The main difference now is that you have people who are going to college and are passionate and actually want to do this, versus you have people who are passionate, sure, on OP as well, but you also have a large percentage of people who are coerced and don't actually want to do the things that they're doing in college in the first place. That's key. That's going to be key to one of the questions on quality later. But before that, first question, is this narrative true in the first place? What do we tell you? We say that you simply can't do anything with a bachelor's degree unless it's from a very prestigious university. Philippe says, yeah, but there are stats for this. To which we say, yes, there are stats exactly because the narrative is so prevalent in status quo. Exactly because people without a bachelor's degree are unable to do anything in the first place. That's the exact problem of this debate that we see. But what they had to prove to you is not that 66% or that there's a 66% higher pay for people who go to for people who have bachelors or whatever, but they had to prove to you that it was the only way for success. And we show you that that's not the case. We redefine success by it being happiness as well, but we also show you how people who are people who don't go to college, people who don't get bachelors, are also able to be successful, also have some sort of nature, also are interested in some sort of ideas. Secondly, they say that but universities give you some sort of critical thinking, and this is somehow good. This is literally a one-liner. They don't show you exclusivity, and they don't show you why this is like true in the first place, except in reply, where they say there's a motivation because of tests. To which we ask, which motivation is greater? Is it the motivation of tests, or is it the motivation of you actually wanting to be there in the first place? We'd say it's rather you being passionate and a passionate student in and of itself. Let's go to quality. What did they generally say? Their main point is you have more money in schools at the point at which you have more students. To which you say, firstly, majority of this money is going to already elite institutions that have extremely high standards, which I talked to you about in third argument, very little engagement. But secondly, they needed to prove to you that this offsets the amount of students that come in, that the amount of money that you get offsets the amount of students and the lectures that they have to take, etc., etc. We show you through various mechanisms how this doesn't happen in terms of lectures becoming less personalized and in terms of the curriculum becoming more general. But the second thing that they say is that there are movements, to which we say, again, why is it exclusive to universities? And two, we're willing to make the trade-off of movements who are people who are already passionate and likely to do this even without universities, versus the quality of education that you get on prop. But secondly, we talked to you about success, and this is extremely important because regardless of the replies attack on characterization, even if we accept that success generally means financial gain, success generally equals money, they can't ensure this with a bachelor's, and they don't get it for many smart dropouts who are unable to get jobs because of the narrative that exists in the job market. For all these reasons, because we ensure quality and because we actually lead to higher happiness and success in society, I'm very proud to propose.
Okay, thank you everyone for your great speeches. Just give me 5 minutes, then I'll come back with the decision.
Okay, I'll ask everybody to turn off their cameras and to mute themselves. We are still live on stream, we are still recording, and we are going to wait for the judge to come back with the decision. Thank you.
Yep, I'll remain here. I can't see anyone, but I'm ready.
Okay, I'll ask others to get back and confirm that they are back. Let's give them a few seconds.
Yes, if everyone could have their videos on. Yep.
Yeah, please just turn on the video. Okay. Okay, you can start.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Okay, so I will follow I suppose, the new convention of giving the decision first and then justifying it. Thank you for everyone for engaging. As I said at the beginning of the call, this is the first time for me to adjudicate a round online, and you have given me a positive experience of it, all of you together. So thank you very much for that. There's some interesting things that I'm noticing about framing, for instance, how you frame your camera, what sort of gesture, there's more cinematic considerations that I'd never thought of before in an actual room. I think these things do matter in the future, so consider how you position yourself in the camera there. Matteo was pretty aggressive. He was like in there. And I think that was effective for the tech side of his thing. So lots of technical things of interest there. So the decision I gave to team opposition. I don't know if we clap online. And largely because of a lot of sort of technical elements in debating, but also a substance. Technically, just that they gave me more material and gave me more breakdown of what they meant by the material. And consistently from side government, I don't get, for instance, an equivalent level of breakdown, for example, of what happiness is. I think in my best speech for the round by Rhea in the second opposition team, I thought that the very meticulous breakdown, for instance, of like example, what is happiness? She breaks it down into 4 elements. Well, financial security, then ability to do that, that kind of level of debating is really useful in giving me a sharper definition of what it is that you are talking about in your mind. So I'd encourage team proposition to bring that level of detail to explaining what it is that they stand for instance. So for instance, so they started in the characterization. In characterization, we get a clear sort of answer, at least in team opposition, about, well, of the narratives and the context of narratives that exist, this one has to compete with these other kinds of narratives. So when we speak of decisions and choice making, this is the world in which we speak. And in the proposition team, I get that there's choice being limited, but I don't get what the context of that limitation is. And of course, they needn't have said that at the beginning, but once that issue is raised by team opposition, they should rise to the occasion and give a more detailed explanation of that. So that was consistent throughout the round. So and then the second consideration was the narrative power. And this was harming team proposition, because when I was getting a more developed explanation of what the power of the narrative is in team opposition, they were saying, well, this is what it actually leads to. It leads to government decisions and business decisions of this kind, of more investment in capital, and all of these things are coming from the power of the narrative. And the rebuttal that I get from the government side is to say that, oh yes, but actually the narrative is forcing people to get in. Yes, it is, but so what? So give me more about what kind of harm is coming out in a detail that tries to offset that. Okay, and so can you get ideal jobs without a college degree? That sort of ended up slightly being a wash, but I think it was something that was, again, we had more detail coming out on side opposition, well, with their stats, which at the beginning, which is not to say that this won them the round, but there was some fleshing out of what it is that this produces. And I was left with a question, however, on either side, especially on team proposition, of what kinds of jobs are we getting in a world where people have a high school degree, which seems to have been accepted in the round as providing mostly general knowledge and not the technical knowledge and the benefits that would come from that. And so one thing that I thought could have been developed better is the definition of success. So we had different kinds of understandings of what that was, a more developed explanation on this side with the conditions that produce success, financial security, etc. But I needed to hear why the definition of success in the side of team proposition mattered for this round. So yes, it's to be able to do something that you have freely chosen and are passionate about, but what does that mean in terms of whatever measures are used? In this debate, it ended up being the number of quality of academic papers that we're going to get and social movements, etc. So why is your definition of success of allowing people to pursue what is passionate to them very important in itself and very important in this round? That wasn't developed in a way that maybe could have shifted the way that we think about this debate. And I think one point that was really done quite well by side opposition was to talk about the question of access. So, or the great good or harm avoidance or great good that they're able to get by having even the less quality education that was characterized as a negative thing. So for all these reasons, just pretty consistently across the board, team opposition had developed more material, was consistent in dealing with it, and referred to each other in their speeches consistently. So better teamwork as well. So thank you very much for giving me this wonderful evening. And I don't think there's room for questions. If I was coaching, I was going to say this is the time to ask them. But I don't know. I'll take guidance from our host. Yeah.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for this debate. Thank you for the adjudication. And I'm now finishing the recording and live stream